Hello and a warm welcome to another edition of To The Point. One of the key decisions taken by the NDA government on the assumption of office was to dismantle the Planning Commission and replace it with the National Institution for Transforming India, that is NITI Aayog. This institution recently has completed 3 years, and coincidentally it's the same year when the Government of India will be presenting its last full-fledged budget before the country goes to polls for the general elections. Joining me now for more on this is Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog, Mr. Rajiv Kumar. Welcome, sir, on To The Point. My first question to you is, how would you really sum up the last 3 years' journey?
It's been a journey with 2 or 3 phases, as it were. The first phase, of course, was the setting up of the NITI Aayog, and so because it was such a brand new concept given by the Prime Minister, the rules had to be devised, the framework had to be devised, etc., and had to be populated, and that took a fair bit because NITI Aayog has got nothing in common with the Planning Commission.
Okay.
It's a brand new organization with a brand new mandate. It does not do any central planning. There is no top-down planning. There is no attempt at one size fit all, and there is also none of the old devolution to the states government. So the entire mandate and roles have changed. So therefore, that took time. The second phase, of course, is that of getting it populated by new young talent.
Okay.
And the government has been very kind to us in the sense that the Prime Minister insisted that we have the maximum flexibility in bringing in fresh talent from outside. So what we did was now there is an amazing mix of young fresh talent with old senior people who have been in the government for a while. So that's the second phase that happened. And the third phase, which probably started about a year ago or so, is one where NITI Aayog is now in its own and fulfilling its mandate, the three-way mandate, I would have thought.
Right.
One is to encourage cooperative federalism.
Okay.
The second one to encourage competitive federalism, and the third to bring about greater accountability and transparency in governance.
Right. But if you look at the Planning Commission, it was almost like a non-legislative body which had significant powers to allocate funds to the states, finances to the states. But it looked like a body which was devoid of fresh ideas. It couldn't keep its ears to the ground. So they were bereft of what was happening actually on the ground. So has NITI Aayog been able to work on these deficiencies of the Planning Commission?
Yeah, so the first biggest dysfunctional aspect of the Planning Commission had become this allocation of resources to the planning, to the various states.
Right.
And therefore there was a bit of a darbar being held the whole year round, where states would come and make their submissions and their and ask for more and more money, which went into the form of development grants. And there were 343 centrally sponsored schemes to which the Planning Commission allocated funds.
Right.
And that became almost like the principal function.
Right.
And that, the states resented that because it really impinged upon their fiscal autonomy, which is why this government has implemented fully the 14th Finance Commission's recommendations of transferring as much as 42% of all tax revenues to the state government. So with that function out of the way, the NITI Aayog is now interacting far more closely with the states. I mean, I've myself visited now 13 states and met each of the finance chief ministers in their state capitals.
So you've completely done away with the centralized process of planning which was seen during the Planning Commission days.
Absolutely, because because our 29 major states are really sort of nations in themselves.
Right.
And therefore so you cannot plan for them from Delhi. So what you need, and which is what NITI Aayog is trying to do in collaboration with these state governments, is trying to develop their own state-specific agendas, development agendas.
If you look at the way the funds were dispersed during the earlier regime, and there was a big talk in the media also about it, that okay, you are not politically in sync with the central ideology or maybe the central policies, you don't get the funds. That was a norm generally which was seen earlier.
Not entirely, because there were the Planning Commission wasn't completely a political animal. It was a technical, professional element as well. So I would give them that due that they did look into the merits of the schemes being or the proposals being put forward by the states.
Right.
But nonetheless, that element of bias and discrimination did remain, which is that you got you got allocations better.
Right.
If you were in line or in sync, as you say.
Right.
But we have, the NITI Aayog is just completely done away with it. We have hardly any resources, and our role is that of the ideas.
Right.
That of the ideas, and being a partner to the state governments in getting their things done
Right.
in the central government, or coming up with new ideas in sort of benchmarking them, for example.
So from what you're saying, I understand that NITI Aayog enjoys a better bonhomie with the states than what the Planning Commission did.
I hope so.
Okay.
But I mean, it's early days, because you just started this. But I think I think most state governments would agree that we have reached out to them, and we are trying to develop a collaborative relationship with them. We are giving them the best practices that are being followed elsewhere in the country for them to learn from those.
Right.
We are also trying to put them through a process of competing with each other
Right.
and creating lots of indices for different sectors. But we work closely, very closely with the state governments,
Right.
because we think that that's where the action is, and two, because it is so important that all our states come onto the same page.
Right.
And there's a convergence of views.
Right.
Because that is, for example, as the GST has demonstrated, it's only when there is this convergence and consensus that you can make
Absolutely.
for very bold and historical reforms.
Right.
So we are trying to do the same in other sectors of the economy.
Mr. Kumar, what interests me, and I would like the audience also to understand through you, and the fact is that when NITI Aayog was conceptualized in 2014 and the decision was taken that you need to come up with a body like this, you had a precedent of a body like a planning commission. It was almost like a revered institution, and obviously the critics of NITI Aayog, which I would in other words say that they are the followers of the Nehruvian concepts, when they criticize and when they come up with criticisms of what NITI Aayog is doing, do you really see that as a hindrance, given the fact that a lot of people who are looking up to NITI Aayog, they expect fast changing results, immediate results they look forward to. So
I don't see that as a hindrance. I don't see that as a hindrance at all.
Okay.
And people are entitled to their views.
Okay.
But just let me give you an example. In the old planning commission, they would do as to how much coal will this country need, and they would derive that from saying how much energy this country will generate,
Okay.
or how much steel they would produce.
Right.
Now the fact is that India doesn't have to necessarily depend entirely on the coal that it produces domestically.
Okay.
Coal can be imported, as
Right.
many of our thermal plants do.
Right.
So so this whole assumption of a closed economy framework in which central planning was done and in which successive plans were formulated had outlived its utility. With the greater integration of the Indian economy with the world economy after 1991, Soviet Union has given up the central planning.
Right.
China has given up the central planning.
Right.
So why would we continue
Absolutely.
or persist, with successive 5-year plans? And Professor Raj Krishna, one of the doyens of the economists, had actually once jocularly mentioned that we keep getting the same version of the old plan. So he would sort of say, oh, this is the 10th version of the first plan, and things like that. Because we had got into that habit, we got into a rut, and it was very important to break out of it. And also, because in NITI Aayog, what we have is a think tank, which is trying to collect all the good ideas from the rest of the society.
And you often call that think tank as an action tank.
I talk, and thank you so much. And I do that because, once you get the idea, you've got to input it into the system and then follow it up. And to see its implementation and its tangible results. Now, very, for example, a very apt example of this is NITI Aayog's nutrition strategy. So we could have just ended by making the nutrition strategy and be done with it. But we're not doing that. We've formulated health indices. We are formulating the nutrition strategies where we will measure the performance of all the states on that particular index and make sure that they actually implement what is there in the nutrition strategy in conjunction or in collaboration with the health ministry in the central government and all the health ministries in the other state government. So that's why it's an action tank.
Absolutely.
We don't just sit back by giving ideas and be done with it. We make sure that we actually get tangible results at the end of the day.
What, unlike Planning Commission, I also see in NITI Aayog is that you have a number of voices from state executive heads to ministers to experts. You also have involved the grassroots people, say for example the nutrition strategy bit. Can we say that this is actually the USP of NITI Aayog?
The USP of NITI Aayog is to keep itself open as possible to all the fresh ideas from within the country and abroad, and to try and get them implemented as far as possible. That's the USP.
Many critics say that when you have too many voices, obviously consensus becomes a little challenging. Yeah. Do you really find that?
No, but I don't think so, because I think this is the power of persuasion, and also as the GST Council has shown, people are always open to reasonable ideas. And if you're actually working if you're actually working in the national interest, which is perceived by all, that you are actually working in the national interest, then I don't think the common person, the common India, they don't resent that. It's when you see that you're working with the vested interest, that's when you get the opposition. And I haven't faced this in NITI Aayog at all.
I'm glad really on what you're telling us. But sir, in the last 3 years, if you look at the several agendas which NITI Aayog has come up with, like promotion of digital payments, reforms in agriculture, education, railways, you've helped the states to undertake the social sector reforms. Now, while all these issues are very important and your inputs are very critical, but at the same time, a certain section of people, the way they have been talking about NITI Aayog is that you run the risk of being called the government spokesperson, or maybe you are working at the behest of the government. How do you really do this tightrope walking, if I could say?
Well, first let me admit that at the end of the day, my chairman is the Prime Minister. So we would have to, in some sense, listen to what he says and respect, what he wants the NITI Aayog to do.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't make us a sort of an agent or just an instrument of the central government itself, because what he has wanted us to do is to encourage cooperative federalism. So you see, if we are following his the mandate that he has given us, we are forced to work with with the state governments. Now, whether we listen to the state governments, competing views, yes, of course we do, and that's taken on board in whatever we do. Now, for example, we've launched recently a program for identifying 115 most backward, we call them aspirational districts in the country. Now, we are working with each government, to make sure that they appoint the district magistrate and make them accountable for the development of these backward industries.
Bibek Doberoy, your member economist, had suggested that the farmer incomes should be taxed. Then there was a slight controversy over that, whether we should do it or not. And the NITI Aayog distanced itself. Similarly, you had a survey where we were talking about the ease of doing business and how much time you can do ease of business. So when these kind of situations arrive, I mean, what I would like to understand from you is that obviously, the Prime Minister is the chairman, you are there as a think tank, an action tank who is working for the policies of the government, but at the same time, when situations like these arrive, for a person like you who is at the helm of affairs, how difficult or how easy is it really for you to
Well, thankfully, all these things happened before I joined.
I know.
So that's one.
I mean, a person in your...
the best way to avoid these situations is to preempt them. Is not to let them happen. And my own sort of way of working is therefore much more consultative. So which is what I do is therefore I consult all my members and my senior officials before taking any position or going ahead with any program. In fact, what I've done in NITI Aayog is to have instituted now, since I came, a weekly senior officials meeting. So we meet every Tuesday morning. We used to meet on Monday morning. But we meet every Tuesday morning. All our senior officers are there, including all the members, and therefore, everybody is free to raise the sort of issue they would like to raise.
As far as the policy planning processes are concerned, do we have enough system of checks and balances where you could actually caution the government about the claims they are making? Because many times, the media raises questions on these. So do we have institutionalized mechanism where you can actually tell the government that, okay, this is where you don't need to be very hyperbolic?
Yeah, one of the sort of functions of the NITI Aayog, because you're a professional body,
Okay.
is to provide the government with the honest, evidence-based feedback.
Right.
Honest, evidence-based feedback, and which works in, by the way, both directions.
Right.
Sometimes the government is not being able to collect enough evidence to claim the credit that is due to them.
Okay.
You know, and recently, for example, this whole employment thing has started,
Right.
and where we help the authors, in the data collection, so that let's just figure out what it is.
Right.
But our focus has to be on the evidence, on analysis, and provide that to the government at the highest level, because I think that's important. That feedback is very important.
Right.
Because unless there is a feedback, any system which doesn't have a honest feedback,
right,
gets into disequilibrium.
But you just spoke about employment, or rather unemployment figures which are there. How bankable they are? Because many people say that we don't have enough data. What are the benchmarks on which you arrive at the figures? So has NITI Aayog really worked on this bit, and what is the kind of benchmark you're taking?
Before I took over, my predecessor chaired a task force,
okay,
which was exactly on this issue of employment data.
Okay.
So that in our country is unfortunately so far generated only once in 5 years.
Right.
And the member of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, must be, their head was also a member of this committee, etc.
Right.
And they have finally recommended, and that's been accepted by the government, that we will now henceforth do an annual data release based on household surveys.
Right.
And those surveys have already started. And in this September onwards, you will get quarterly data based on extensive household surveys,
right,
on employment.
Okay.
So that's one part of it, and
Okay.
that's coming up.
Right.
The second thing that we're trying to do is that, okay, those are household surveys, but in the US, they have a household survey, but also they have a payroll survey,
right,
where the employers are asked as to how many people have you employed or let go, or whatever in the
right,
last quarter. We are starting that also,
mm-hmm,
and we will collect this data. So we'll have, therefore, from now on, NITI Aayog will produce data on employment from both the directions.
Okay, and this is going to be annually?
Well, quarterly.
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 Okay. So according to what you're saying, the figures, or the unemployment scenario, if I could say, is not as scary as it has been made out to be.
Not at all. I actually must commend to you the recent report produced by Ghosh and Ghosh, Soumyakanti Ghosh of the Chief
Right.
Economist of State
Right.
Bank of India, and Pulak Ghosh of the IIM Bangalore, a professor,
Right.
who have looked at data from EPFO, Employment
Right.
Provident Fund Organization, and they've really cleaned up the data and worked very hard at it. And I've actually read the report myself and the methodology, and they, for example, come up with the fact that in last year, 16-17, this economy generated 55 lakh jobs in the formal sector.
So anecdotally,
it's
right,
not, a couple of people, as you would expect, Ramesh included, have criticized that report recently in an article in Hindu.
right,
And these two authors have actually now rebutted those criticisms.
mm-hmm,
So, so we are very sure, that those data that they have collected are very genuine, and they've used a conservative estimate,
right,
for coming up with this data. This is what NITI Aayog will continue to do in the future.
right,
To use agencies like EPFO, the Employment Insurance, ESIC,
right,
State Insurance Corporation, the National Pension Commission,
right.
all the other organizations like Lola, Ola and Uber, etc., to collect that data.
So anecdotally, what we've seen, that the jobs were getting lost, so which means there's nothing to worry. There won't be any job losses as it has been made out to be.
No, in some industries there have been job losses.
Right.
See, and this is the process that goes on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably far too young, but Rajiv Gandhi, when he introduced the computers in this country,
right,
there's a big hullabaloo.
Yeah.
That, look, now no more jobs, no more employment in banks. And some banks did lose jobs because, computers replaced, manual tellers. But jobs get created in other places.
Right.
For example, in our case now, there have been some job losses in industries where automation has taken place.
Right.
Right? And therefore, and that's acceptable. But at the same time, a large number of jobs have been created in logistics, in logistics, in software, in systems integration, in companies like, we're dealing with e-commerce, which is also very new. So the economy keeps changing.
Right.
And it is the role of our organizational NITI Aayog to keep tracking that change.
Right.
And not get caught in an old, outdated system.
Absolutely.
And, and just saying that we will only collect that data and not anything else.
Right.
So that's the situation. So yes, you cannot deny that there have been job losses. Yeah, some of the engineering companies have automated their functions,
Right.
but others have come up.
If you look at the Planning Commission was bound within the 5-year term. But what NITI Aayog is talking about is a 15-year vision document. Then you have these mid-term reviews of 7 years, then 3 years. But if I were to ask you, these reports of NITI Aayog, I mean, they are advisory, mandatory, recommendatory. How does a layman look at these reports?
These are, of course, advisories.
Okay.
These are not mandatory; they cannot be.
Okay.
And what we are now working on is actually first a development agenda for 2022. So the Prime Minister has given a call for a New India 2022, and we thought that it is up to us. It is required of NITI Aayog to come up with the details of what can be done in the next 5 years.
Okay.
Sort of up to 2022, to create that growth momentum that India needs in different sectors. You see, now the growth has started again. We are now at, we'll do a 7.5 in 2018-19, and then we'll go on to do, I'm sure, 8.5%. But the sectors from which this growth will come,
right?
How to modernize our agricultural sector, how to increase tourist inflows, etc. All of those details have to be done, and we are doing that at the moment. This report should be available within the first half of this year.
Okay.
Then we will do a vision document.
Okay.
Because it's important for every country, in China and Japan and Korea, all of them have done it. To set themselves a an ambitious vision. So that then enthuses the common person.
Right. But Mr. Kumar, budget is round the corner. On what lines, without getting into the details of the mechanism and the processes, on what lines are you really expecting the budget as far as things like rural distress, unemployment, private investment, all these things are concerned? What is the kind of expectation you have?
Yeah, so the first thing I must say is that unlike most people sort of who've been talking about this, there is the last budget of the government, and the elections are around the next year, etc.
Right.
It will not pander to any electoral causes.
Okay, so it's not going to be a populist budget.
It's not going to be this populist, sort of,
right.
Budget, with the handouts to everybody concerned, etc., etc.
Okay.
I think the Prime Minister doesn't believe in that. So what you will get is a budget which will focus on improving the welfare levels in certain specific segments or sectors. For example, we know, for me, for example, one of the worst things is that our malnutrition levels for 70 years have remained as bad as they are. 50% of our mothers are anemic at the moment. We have to spend 83% out of our pocket for our medical expenses. We are a very fortunate lot who are working in the central government, but when the great majority of our people,
right.
They don't have access to public health or public education. So now that's got to be improved. So that's where the budget should focus and probably would focus. The other thing, of course, you mentioned yourself is agriculture, farmers' distress. And I think what we need and what hopefully you may find in the budget is a new approach towards agriculture.
Okay.
Which is focused on raising farmers' incomes rather than agricultural output.
Right.
Let me just give you a small example.
Right.
You see, if you keep increasing, for example, the output of tomatoes, what happens is that their prices fall and the farmers have to throw them onto the roadside and their incomes don't increase.
Absolutely.
Instead, if you were to give the farmer the loan or the means and the technology to put a small plant to convert that tomatoes into tomato puree,
right?
Of which, by the way, we import $1 billion worth because it's used in all these pizza tops and so on and so forth. Then that farmer, rather than having to throw that tomatoes,
can use it.
Will add value, and his income will actually double or quadruple.
So the farmers making them more self-reliant, not dependent on the market forces?
Making them producers of agricultural products and not agricultural commodities.
Right.
That's the big difference, right? And rather than produce only mango, connect them with a company
Right.
in which they can be equity holders, or connect them with a company which produces mango pulp.
Right.
And cans it.
Absolutely.
And sells it. You see, I mean, so that's the whole approach towards agriculture needs to be changed, to modernize our agriculture, rather than keep talking about small and marginal farmer and and output of wheat and output of rice. Talk about how agriculture should catch up with the rest of the economy.
Absolutely.
Today 49-50% of our people are working in agriculture and producing only 16% of the GDP.
Right.
That's the state of backwardness. That has to change.
There is also mild criticism somewhere which says that often, NITI Aayog bats for the market forces, for the private investments. These kind of mild criticisms also keep on coming. How would you really counter that?
No, I think it's a more nuanced situation.
Okay.
But the first part of it is that this Prime Minister and NITI Aayog are trying their utmost to put in place what is called a development state.
Okay.
Which is accountable, which is transparent,
right,
which is efficient, and which creates those conditions for the private sector to thrive.
Okay.
Right? So that's the situation. So you have to have both. You have to have an efficiently working government which fulfills its mandate. For example, at the moment,
that's what you call the Bharati model of development.
Well, that's what I call yes, because because that's what's needed.
Right.
But but it's not. Absolutely. It's not this or that.
Right.
You have to have both the government performing its own duties and mandates, like for example, making sure that there is law and order in the country,
right,
and the children get their basic education, and mothers get their basic health, but also create the conditions for the private sector to contribute, because without their contribution, this country cannot grow. So, all of those people who are talking about isms, capitalism or socialism or this and that, I think are wasting their time.
Okay.
What we need is Indianism, which is that, a model, a philosophy or way of working which is rooted in the ground realities of India.
So I'm sure all the isms you're talking about, you've already silenced all the critics. And that's a note to also end the program, sir. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure being here.
So that's it on this episode of To The Point. See you next time with another personality. Goodbye and thanks for watching.